All right. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you might be in the United States. We welcome you and are glad each of you have decided to join us here. This is GPA Midstream's API PSMS webinar. PSMS, of course, stands for Pipeline Safety Management Systems. My name is Stuart Saulters, and I work for GPA Midstream. And today I am joined by Colin Frazier and Sam Minifie, who work for API. So we're excited to have a conversation with everyone about this important topic. In terms of agenda, you see kind of the path forward for us for this hour. We'll do a quick just kind of intro with Sam and Colin, talking about some of the stuff they've been working on. They'll run through a few slides. And then I think of most importance for this event will be the opportunity to ask questions. So I've got some questions I want to ask Colin and Sam, but I think more importantly, we want you to ask questions to Colin and Sam. And so we have the Q&A feature available for you to do that. Just given the large number of people on the call, we feel like that's probably the most seamless way to get the questions from you all. So find that Q&A feature, type in your questions, and we'll get those from you and be ready to ask our presenters as those questions come in. So if you have a question right now, go ahead and put it in there. But if not, when the time arises, be sure to ask your question so we can have some good conversation today. So with that, I think Sam, you are teed up to go first. So I'll hand it to you to introduce yourself, talk about what you do there at API, and then run through a couple slides.
Sure. Thank you, Stuart. My name is Sam Minifie. I'm a senior policy advisor with the American Petroleum Institute, and I work in our midstream policy group. And I staff issues including pipeline safety management systems, damage prevention, public awareness, and engagement and workforce development. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about pipeline safety management systems with you all. It's something I'm passionate about and interested in, and I've really had the pleasure of working on PSMS throughout the 10, almost 11 years that I've been at API. And in kind of looking back at the timeline a little bit, there were a number of high-profile pipeline incidents in the 2010, 2011 timeframe: Marshall, Michigan, San Bruno, California, and then the Yellowstone River in Montana. And those three incidents were somewhat of a catalyst for the National Transportation Safety Board to, in their reviews and investigations of those incidents, provide recommendations to API for API to develop a safety management system. A little bit of history on API. API has been around since 1919 and is really a leader in developing standards for the oil and gas industry, all the way from the types of drills and equipment that are used in exploration and production, all the way through safe refining operations, and pipelines and midstream infrastructure are really in the middle of that. And there are over 800 API standards that are out there throughout the industry and really help drive the standardization and improve safety performance across the country and internationally as well. And so NTSB saw API's role here to develop a safety management system for the pipeline industry. And they had seen some of the successes of safety management systems that were apparent in the nuclear, aviation, and chemical industries, and really been able to see those industries improve safety, drive down incidents, and really just in kind of improve the way that they do business and improve the stakeholders' kind of amount that they were concerned or reduce concerns with the industry as well. And so they provided that recommendation to API in 2012. Took about 3 years for API to develop the recommended practice. That's a recommended practice 1173, and it was developed by a handful of pipeline operators, and PHMSA participated as well. And API really follows an American National Standards Institute accredited process for developing these recommended practices and standards through consensus and through a very rigorous process of development, comment resolution, ballot, and publication. So the first edition of 1173 was published in 2015, July of 2015, and the goal, as you can see there, is provide a framework and a tool to improve pipeline safety performance, move the needle on pipeline safety. And one of the first actions or first responses from the NTSB was to close their recommendation with a remark of exceeds expectation. So they kind of approved of the first edition publication of 1173, and we're pleased to see industry take this on and publish the document. Next slide, Stuart. And so what is a pipeline safety management system, or PSMS? And it's really a comprehensive way to manage pipeline risks and improve safety performance. There's over 500,000 miles of transmission pipeline and multiple 100,000 miles of gathering pipeline in the U.S. And so those are complex processes. They are incredibly complicated, and the risks and the impacts potentially can be very, very significant. And so pipeline SMS is built around this continuous improvement cycle of plan, do, check, act. And in very small font there, you can see what elements, there's 10 program elements within pipeline safety management systems, but you can see where those different elements fall in that process of kind of figuring out where your risks are, implementing a mitigation plan or a management plan, seeing if they're working, and if adjustments need to be made, and then making those adjustments, and then starting that process all over again. And I think one of the real core components of PSMS is really not being complacent and kind of staying ever vigilant, and understanding that those risks, while potentially infrequent, can be very, very significant. One of the real, I think, focuses of the document is the building and maintaining a robust safety culture. And there's a line in 1173 that says you cannot have a strong pipeline safety management system without a robust safety culture. And those two, I think, really go hand in hand. And we talked a little bit about the aviation, chemical, and nuclear industries. And certainly the pipeline industry has drawn on some of those little lessons on safety culture in particular from those industries. Nuclear, for one, has a very, very in-depth library on kind of leading practices around safety culture related to some of these program elements. And so there's some learnings from other industries that we've applied throughout the years on SMS as well. Next slide, please. And so after the document, the recommended practice, was published in 2015, API really tried to form this pipeline SMS industry team. And it's a little bit unique in the trade space. A lot of times in trade organizations, we put our head down and we work with our members and certainly coordinate with other affiliated trades and with government partners. But this kind of system, this kind of structure is a little bit unique in our world, in that you have all aspects, all segments of the pipeline industry coming together to work on pipeline SMS and to kind of provide that unified perspective on improving safety performance. So GPA Midstream on the gathering side and processing side, API, LIPA, and INGA on the transmission side, and then AGA, American Gas Association, and American Public Gas Association on the distribution side, and then two of the main pipeline contractors as well. So again, the whole pipeline supply chain to present this kind of a unified implementation of SMS. And again, maybe one of the things I should mention as well, when the document was published, and it still is, Recommended Practice 1173 is a voluntary document. It is not a regulation that's incorporated by the federal government or by state governments. So it is not a requirement. So it is really a voluntary document that operators take on voluntarily and implement voluntarily. And again, the purpose, as you can see on the bottom there, is to enhance safe pipeline operations by supporting operators in the adoption, implementation, and conformance of 1173. Again, all on this proactive, voluntary basis. Next slide, please. And then I think this is probably the most important slide of my few here, and it's really an encouragement to start the journey. No matter where you are in the process, if you've never heard of 1173, if you're just looking through it, if you're trying to get your leadership to commit to it, if you've done a gap analysis, you can and should be taking credit for the aspects of 1173 that you are already doing. While there are 10 program elements in 1173, every pipeline operator is doing some aspect of pipeline safety management systems and should be taking credit for it, and should be counting themselves as starting the journey and starting that implementation process. So I really encourage you all to go to pipeline.sms.org. It's our publicly available website. Everything on there is free and can be downloaded and can be accessed. So a couple of the resources that are up there, there are a maturity model and booklets. The booklet, you can see the far right picture. The maturity model kind of helps an operator figure out where they are in the journey. Am I really just starting out on this? Do I really need to figure out about how my system conforms with the requirements of the document? And maybe I'm kind of moving up that conformance level to a level 2 or a level 3. And then maybe once you progress a little bit further to a 4 or 5, you move from conformance to more of that effectiveness model. I've done all the shall statements, I've done all the provisions and the requirements of the document. Now I need to see if they're really working, if they're really being effective in building that safety culture, in improving continuously, and in really driving safety moving forward. So the maturity model might be a really good place to start. And then I would direct you to the booklets. There are 3 tactical booklets: why pipeline safety management systems, or why pipeline SMS will benefit safety, what is a pipeline SMS, and how to implement a pipeline SMS. And they're fairly high level, but they, I think, give people an idea of what this whole framework is that we're talking about, why it's important for a company. And so if you're trying to get your leadership on board, or if you're trying to make the business case internally, I think those are really good resources to point to say, here's why others are doing SMS, here's why other industries are doing SMS, and here's why our peers in the pipeline industry are doing SMS. And then the third booklet, that how to implement, starts that journey a little bit of how you start making those changes and driving some of those processes internally. Next, I'd really point your attention to some of the tools that are available, and again, all free, but there are 3 tools: the planning, implementation, and evaluation tool. The place to start is the planning tool, and that helps you do a gap analysis between the requirements of the document, the shall statements that are in 1173, and your company's current processes and procedures to figure out, do I have a gap between what's required in the document and what we're already doing? And then it helps figure out what are some of the evidence, the justifications that I could use to show that I don't have a gap, that I'm complying with that requirement. And then it helps figure out what are the priorities here. If I have a number of gaps, how do I prioritize the ones that I'm trying to close? Certainly, we're not advocating that an operator bites off every gap and tries to close them on day one, but there are maybe a few that you want to close early on in the process, and then some that are less of a priority. And then the implementation and evaluation tools will help you figure out, okay, I've done my gap analysis, I've prioritized my gaps, I'm now closing them. Now I'm going to figure out if the implementation is taking hold and if really the implementation is then being effective moving forward. There are also a couple others, just 2 others that I'll point out. We have a free computer-based training. It's about 15 minutes long for pipeline safety management systems. It can be embedded in your learning management system. Or it can also just live on the API website, but it's a great resource to be able to use. And then we have a notable practices tool that's free as well, that really shows what good looks like, and it breaks down the program elements and even some of the sub elements to highlight the notable practices that API has identified through the third-party operator assessments that Colin will talk about. But I think that's a good way of figuring out, am I being successful, or am I driving towards the right metrics in this space? There is always an opportunity to learn from peers and to learn from some of your peer operators that are doing SMS, whether you want to learn from someone that's just starting out and is very early on in their journey, or with someone that's maybe a little bit further or more mature in their journey. API, GPA can help pair you up with someone to talk to. Just feel free to reach out, and we'll get you connected there. So just encourage anyone, wherever you are in your journey, start today, pick up that tactical booklet or that gap analysis tool and get started. And we'll talk about the importance of getting started. more later on today as well. And then just quickly on the 1173 path forward. So as we mentioned, the first edition of the recommended practice was published in 2015. And so all API standards, whether they're recommended practices or standards, are due for action every 5 years. So we are in the process right now. We did a 5-year reaffirmation, brought us up until 2027. For the second edition, we are in the process right now of developing the second edition, going through all the comments that were submitted on the ballot of the second edition, and again, using that ANSI approved process to develop consensus and going through that process. We're about halfway through the comment resolution process now, and our goal is to publish a second edition of 1173 in 2026 or early 2027. I'm really hoping to have the former there. But if you would like to participate in that process, it's an open process. Anyone who would like to can participate in the revision of 1173. Again, feel free to reach out to Stuart or myself and we'll get you plugged in there. I believe that's the last slide of mine. Oh, well, who could forget the inputs on 1173? Last up, we'll just list some of the inputs that are in the second edition. We use some of the learnings from the third-party assessment that Colin has done a great job leading. Some learnings from the AGA peer review program, similar program, but it's more specific to a program element itself. And then we rearranged some of the safety culture. We talked about the importance of having a robust safety culture. It was not organized in a great fashion in the first edition. So now we have characteristics of safety culture for each program element. And our goal is that it helps an operator figure out if they're making the right steps and improving safety culture. There are no added requirements, no shall statements in those sections. Those are really just more of a observation and a way, again, to check to see if that progress is taking hold. There's also a very short annex that helps align process safety guidance with PSMS and just try to make sure the crosswalk is there. One thing I think that may be applicable for this group is an annex for very small operators. For those operators that are under a certain threshold of customers or throughput, trying to implement the full 1173 can be very challenging. It was written for transmission operators and by transmission operators, and while we're making some of those adjustments in the second edition, companies and operators that are more personnel or resource constrained might have a challenge implementing the second or implementing 1173. And so we've developed this annex which boils down some of the requirements in 1173 to some of those non-negotiables. So management of change, engaging your stakeholders to really make sure that an operator, no matter their size, is doing some of these really basic SMS tenets and then can take credit for some of those tenets moving forward. So it's really a way of us making sure that the document is scalable to an operator of any size moving forward. So that will be in the second edition, and I think will be a really good tool to help an operator start their journey, no matter what size or their throughput. So with that, I will turn it over to Colin to talk about some of the assessment programs that are available.
Thanks, Sam. Happy to be here, everyone. Welcome. My name is Colin Frazier. I am the Director of Safety Programs at API. So in that role, I manage the Center for Offshore Safety, as well as all of API's safety assessment programs in all the segments. So for here, that is Pipeline Safety Management System Assessment Program. Just to ensure we're all on the same page, we really created this program not to be a way to shame operators into participating in this, but more about really understanding where the industry is with regard to implementation. So if you think of Sam is managing all of like the PHMSA interplay as well as the standard itself. It really comes to me more on the implementation side of the house. So that being said, in 2019, the API Pipeline SMS team got together and really put together a program that includes an assessment protocol that is fair and analogous and applicable to all size operators at all levels of potential pipeline SMS maturity. We did this specifically because we understood that not every operator is a large multinational company with an internal audit function. And we thought this was the best way to provide on the ground sort of expertise to really serve as the mentorship arm of pipeline SMS. So when you think about doing these assessments, I'm using really the best of the best subject matter experts from the pipeline SMS community. So that being said, each of them have greater than 25 years of experience and go through a rigorous kind of vetting process internally with us to make sure they, one, have the knowledge to really support the industry on the ground, as well as the right demeanor to make this a continuous improvement exercise as opposed to an audit exercise. And I think that's very important because, when our assessors are on site, they're not checking boxes. They're truly trying to understand how your company and your safety programs function and are there as mentors and guides to talk through the issues to figure out what some continuous improvement efforts might look like for your management system. Additionally, we did that in 2019, and I'll tell you a little bit more about our success with that program in a minute. But in 2024, as a result of feedback that we had been getting from assessments and from contractors, was that, some operators are already requiring contractors to submit gap analyses as part of the bidding process for work for some of those operations. We understood and want to support that contractor community because those requirements look different for every operator right now. And that's not really the purpose of pipeline SMS. What we did was we produced a guide for contractors, and that includes 56 of the 234 total shall and should statements in 1173 edition 1. So those are the requirements of 1173 that most often operators are using to show conformance to pipeline SMS. Obviously, 1173 is written for operators, but it's understood that the contractors do a lot of the work that show the implementation of that pipeline safety management system. So we want to ensure that the contractors also have the tools to use that same language and really drive their own safety programs. The purpose of this is to try and get away from that binder on the shelf approach for each of the customer operators, because if you're having to look up what the requirements are, that is not the level of awareness that, safety more broadly finds valuable across the industry. So we're really trying to focus more contractor-owned safety programs that contribute to an operator's overall pipeline safety management system. Can you go to the next slide, please, Stuart? So let's talk about assessments for operators. So far, I have done, I believe, 29 assessments for 23 operators. So I already have operators coming back and scheduling second and third assessments with the program. I would be remiss if I didn't say that API runs all of our assessment programs, including this program, on a not-for-profit basis, and API actually subsidizes these assessments. So what I don't want you to do is think that API is trying to make money off safety. Safety is for everyone, and I run these programs as such. So what I want this group to know is that if you ever decide to do an assessment, please consider us, because we're going to get you the experts for the cheapest we can get those experts. And I hope you can understand our hope that more people will utilize the programs as a result of our structuring them in this way. So that being said, since we started the program in 2020, those 23 operators that have participated represent 25 to 30% of all liquids transported in the United States of America. And those are the statistics that are pulled directly from the PHMSA data that is submitted federally and compared to the operators that we have assessed. I am trying to work on getting the same figures for the gas side of the house, but there are many more op IDs on the gas side than are on the liquid side. So bear with me as I try to get a reasonable estimate for that. But I will say that currently 11 of the operators who have participated are liquids operators and 12 are from the downstream gas community. So we have a really good mix of trying to get the full supply chain relevant to pipelines participating in this program, because what we're finding is a lot of the gas good practices that we're seeing in downstream gas can also be applied and pulled into liquids and vice versa. So Sam talked about that notable practice list. That notable practice list is not only coming from liquids, it's coming from every operator that we have done assessments for, and we continually update that list as we see more good practices. As you see in 2026, I have more assessments on the calendar than I ever have in the past. So I'm looking forward to, that market penetration number to go up even further as this program matures. I will say that with the publication of the second edition of 1173, with that small operator annex, the very small operator annex, API will be, we do have an assessment offering for very small operators and have done that in the past. And just for the sake of ballpark figures, I can do a full assessment to 1173 for a very small operator for about $25,000. So we're really trying to make these high impact and as low of cost as humanly possible, but that still gets those experts to your headquarters, to your field sites for field verifications to give you that feedback that could be really beneficial in that plan, do, check, act process. And that's really the purpose of these assessments, is to give you the ammunition that you need to understand what actions are going to cause the most benefit to you increasing your maturity to 1173. There is no follow-up from these assessments whatsoever. It is just viewed as subject matter expertise that we are giving to you to do with what you will and where you see the greatest maturity opportunities. So with that, can we go to the next slide, Stuart, please? So we also produce benchmarking in these programs. And I will say the operators that come really like this because, as an anecdote, being a 2.4 maturity by your own volition or through your own assessment process doesn't mean much. But if you see where that conformance score lands relative to the other statistical way we anonymize and blind this information, you can actually see where you sit from a conformance standpoint relative to your peers in the industry. And for instance, I have also seen, management get really mad when someone is at a 2.4 instead of a 3, but then they see, oh, that score is actually in the first quartile of all participants. So it really is that context that can really help leaders understand what maturity means and how the industry is moving toward these requirements. I'm not going to focus on any particular element here with regard to the benchmarking scores. I'll just highlight that stakeholder engagement has always been the lowest scoring element in the benchmarking program. But I will say, with the publication of 1185, which gives industry a little more meat with regard to the tactics that can be used for these programs, we are seeing that average maturity score increase across the industry. And I actually gave a little talk to a group about public engagement recently, And what I find interesting is there does seem to be a knowledge gap in what 1173 requires for stakeholder engagement and what 1185 requires. So I'll only say that 1173, the biggest issue we see in stakeholder engagement is 1173 does require kind of like that full feedback loop to be in place from a public awareness perspective so that you can gather comments or questions from the public to address their safety concerns. So even if you're not fully implementing 1185, the basics of 1185 are already included in 1173 from a principled perspective. So if you're struggling with that, I would encourage you to look at the requirements of 1173 first, because that really kind of frames the broad expectations, and you may be able to put together some programmatic materials that start that process for 1173 that will pay off in spades as you look at 1185 more holistically in the future. So, and I'll show you here, as you can see, obviously the number of companies changes as we do these assessments. In 2022, there were 14, 2023, there were 16. Last year, there were 20. And in this version that I will produce for the API Pipeline Conference in April will include the 2025 numbers with an analysis of kind of what we're seeing, whether that be an increase or maybe a backslide in conformance maturity in some certain areas. Stuart, next slide, please. So this is more about the contractor program. I'm not going to belabor this. I feel like I've covered the 56 requirements that we included. We have done 5 full assessments with maturity scoring in the 2 years that we have been doing this, 24 and 2025. I will argue that a lot of contractors are coming to this program whenever operators put them on PIPs in order to improve their safety performance. So if you're running into those issues, you know, we can do one of these assessments. A full assessment for a contractor is around $10,000. So it's one of those things, if you have some high-risk contractors that are having some issues with safety, we think it's a good, fairly low-cost program, and also run on a not-for-profit basis that you can use to point your contractors to for more assistance in safety. As part of this program, we also have some more tailored options for contractors, understanding that many of them just have fewer resources from an administrative nature to implement these programs. So our entry-level program is actually just a gap analysis program. If they don't have the resources or the knowledge to go through those 56 requirements to understand true scope and whether that's applicable to their operations or not, our assessors go through that gap analysis with them and really talk them through the requirements so they understand what the document is telling them to do. So we are trying to really make this available and for awareness to increase about the contractor program. I will say that PHMSA has been very complimentary about us trying to include these contractors as you know, they represent, you know, higher risk work in the pipeline industry, and we can't expect to see large improvements in safety if we aren't addressing that stakeholder community as part of this process. Can we go to the next slide, Stuart? I believe this is my last slide, but from a contractor perspective, I talked about the guided gap assessment. Offering 2 is a focused assessment. And this is just if contractors know they have problems in very specific areas, we can provide an expert to go out and help them with that relevant to the contractor guide and the requirements therein. And offering 3 is the full assessment, which is the only one of these that includes a maturity evaluation of those 56 requirements. So I will say from a PIP perspective, we are seeing most people go for the full offering. Offering 3, like I said, that is about $13,000 US. And then the guided gap analysis we offer for a flat $2,000 fee. So we are really trying to bring this at the lowest cost on a not-for-profit way to the industry so that you can connect directly with these experts with very little administrative lifting effort, because API can maneuver all of those logistics for you. So that is kind of the crash course, I would say, in the assessment programs. There are a lot more details, but if any of you have any questions about them or their purpose, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I would be remiss, though, if I didn't talk a little bit about 2026 and what our priorities are. And to Sam's point about the goals for 1173 for this year are publication. And really what that means for my team and for the Pipeline SMS industry team is we'll be standing up groups to ensure that the tools that are published on pipeline-sms.org reflect the second edition requirements. And we also will be updating our assessment protocols based on that. There also may be an update to that contractor guide as a result of publication of second edition. So as we work through that this year, I would anticipate most of those offerings will be available before next year, but I just wanted to flag for you that, we're changing all of those to align as 1173 matures, and hoping to make these tools more beneficial and easier to use and more automated kind of as this process continues. So with that, Stuart, I think I'll turn it back over to you, and we can start questions.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. Thanks, Sam. Lots of good information. So thank you for sharing that. Just to give everybody a heads up, this is being recorded. Slides will be available to attendees. And so if you missed something or want to rewatch, want to relook at something, we'll be following up with you on how to access the recording and the slides. So like I mentioned, I have a couple questions that I'll throw out to Sam and Colin, but please do add your questions to the Q&A feature, and we will see those come through and ask them for you. So Sam, I'll go to you first with a question. Can you talk a little bit about, you kind of alluded to some of this, but can you talk a little bit more about the regulators, PHMSA in particular, and Colin, you mentioned some of this too, but just curious, Sam, if you can talk a little bit more about how the regulators view PSMS implementation.
Sure. Good question. That's one of the first questions we're always asked by state regulators with NAPSR or PHMSA certainly is industry really doing this? Is it effective as a voluntary program, or should it be a requirement? Should it be in the code? Should we audit some of these programs? And really our stance is that voluntary really enables the full implementation of SMS and prevents a one-size-fits-all kind of checklist, presents a one sheet of paper with a whole bunch of checklists, and you're either doing it or you're not. And certainly there are aspects on the conformance side of SMS that may lend itself to having complied with a requirement or conformed with a requirement. But you cannot necessarily audit safety culture, and you have a hard time, I think, auditing the effectiveness of some of these SMS programs. And I think, would do a disservice to the operators that are doing SMS if you audit or use a check the box kind of activity to measure SMS effectiveness. We have heard from the current PHMSA administration, the last PHMSA administration, career staff at PHMSA, including the top two positions who recently retired, and then the head of the NTSB, that all support SMS being voluntary. Certainly, I think we would all like to see more operators doing SMS and maybe doing more with SMS. I think that's always an ambition, but that does not lend itself to making SMS a requirement and distilling all of the benefits that can be achieved on SMS into a audit exercise. That being said, I think we have seen in recent years PHMSA taking some steps to really encourage operators to do SMS. Just about a year ago, so March of last year, PHMSA published their advisory bulletin on SMS, and it was the first PHMSA action, or public action really, under this PHMSA leadership. And that really covered kind of three phases on SMS. It really asked or encouraged operators to implement PSMS that covered all of the 10 elements to really drive that continuous improvement and to maintain a positive safety culture. And I think covering those elements and kind of really explicitly calling out safety culture as one of the three tenets of that advisory bulletin speaks, one, to the importance of safety culture, but two, the difficulty in auditing safety culture. It's very, very hard, I think, to develop a questionnaire or a checklist that would really get at the heart of safety culture. Instead, it comes from a lot of internal company programs and company support, stakeholder engagement internally and externally as well. And so instead of trying to go down that audit route, you saw PHMSA really try to encourage operators to continue this voluntary and proactive implementation. We've also seen PHMSA publish their distribution report and gas distribution report to Congress that was part of the 2020 Pipes Act. That really assessed the progress of gas distribution operators implementing SMS, their maturity, and then the feasibility under which full implementation of SMS as required by 1173 was not feasible. And that really led to PHMSA coming up with this psi-scaled approach to SMS which stated that operators under a certain threshold, whether it's customer size, throughput, employee levels, really didn't or weren't able to implement SMS as required by 1173, and instead should be taking on this more psi-scaled approach. And that led API to develop the very small operator annex that will be included in the second edition. NTSB, certainly not a regulatory agency, but does all the investigations for transportation incidents. And they have included recommendations for operators to implement an SMS in a number of their recent reports. One being the San Pedro Bay final report that was issued in January of 2024. And then the NTSB also issued a safety alert in July of 2024, which really encouraged operators again to implement SMS and kind of expounded on some of the benefits. And so while we have the kind of support from PHMSA and NTSB to continue SMS on a voluntary nature, that continuance of it being voluntary is incumbent on industry continuing to implement and continuing to mature their programs. One way we measure that is through the annual survey and annual report and help disseminate some of those progressions on maturity. And two, a continuance of improving safety performance. PHMSA leadership in years past has said we're only one high-profile incident away from SMS becoming mandatory or required. And I think that is probably true, even though we have seen a number of improvements on safety. And just from a metrics perspective, across the segments, so distribution, transmission, and gathering, since 2015, where SMS was published, all pipeline incidents have declined 13%. There's 89 fewer incidents, and this was pulled these numbers last year, so it's 2025 report, so it would be 2024 incident data. So those are probably a little bit outdated and need a refreshing, but it's just one data point, I think, and an example of how SMS is taking hold 10 years after its implementation, and an example of the fact that SMS is helping improve safety performance. But again, it's incumbent on all of us to start that journey to show progress and maturity and continue to drive safety performance and incident reductions for SMS to continue to be voluntary and to really continue to show the regulators that we are being proactive in our implementation, and that, again, SMS is better as a voluntary program than a requirement.
Colin, did you have something to add?
Yeah, Sam, I just want to emphasize what Sam said about us trying to educate the regulators as well as NTSB about specific safety management system considerations, for lack of a better term. So I did just want to offer to the group that 1173 is really mirrored, like Sam said, after really, landmark sort of safety initiatives in other industries, but also within the oil and gas industry itself. So after the Macondo incident, the Center for Offshore Safety was stood up, and we are driving, safety in much the same way that the pipeline SMS industry team is driving that. But I also want to bring up the downstream, the refiners and the chemical operators as well, because with this exact same type of initiative, they've seen since 2011, when we started collecting all the data, a 30% drop in their tier 1 and tier 2 incidents. So if you take nothing else away from this, I would say, think about this is the way that the oil and gas industry manages safety, not just in pipeline, but in all the other segments as well. And we think, with its implementation, we will continue to see those metrics go down, and therefore less, or shall I say, more comfortable interactions with the regulators is the hope in the future. Additionally, I will just say that when I talk to regulators and stakeholders about this in the pipeline space, I really try to give them the knowledge that from an other segment's perspective, implementing a robust safety management system is not a 3-year timeline. It is not a 5-year timeline. It is likely closer to a decade timeline, just from a, you're worried about conformance for the initial part, but then you start actually worrying about how your programs are performing within that system. And I just like to keep that in mind, because what we don't want to happen is for a large event to happen and this to become regulation almost overnight and people to start scrambling to start that journey. So I will say, from my perspective, API is here to help in any way we can, even if you just have questions about where to start the journey. So it's my goal to have that expertise in-house to really help the entire industry try and start the implementation journey. So we're doing our best to communicate those things, to show why the second you regulate it, it becomes a race to the bottom with regard to compliance. And that's really goes directly against the Plan, Do, Check, Act philosophy of pipeline safety management systems. It's not about the gaps you have, it's about the continuous improvements and the planning that you do in order to close those gaps. So I just want to say, thank you. Sam and I are really passionate about this and are, excited about what the program will bring and how we're going to drive industry incidents to a lower point.
That's great. Well, thank you guys. Looks like we've got a couple of folks who found that Q&A feature, so thank you for asking these questions. I thought this was a good question that came in. When you think about size, for a downstream distribution operator, it is number of customers. For a midstream gathering processing company, it could be what lines are jurisdictional, what lines aren't. So maybe in the context of that, talk a little bit about the 1173 expectations, jurisdictional line, PHMSA jurisdictional lines versus, pipe R gathering, if you want to use the regulatory term.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. And this is, I'll tread carefully because this is not a space that I know a ton on. We get into the gathering line classifications, and I think the gist of it is that an operator really can decide those determining factors for themselves. There is no necessarily a threshold for if you have 100 miles of type R pipe, you're not considered a very small operator, but if you have 99, you are. I think that is really left up to the operator to figure out. I think there's certainly some parameters or some guiding factors that are included in there, but there is no hard and fast, this is a small operator, this is not a small operator. And certainly I think that the tool can be helpful for everyone, whether you're a large operator as well. I think there are some that plan to use it just as a starting place to say, are we doing the right thing? And okay, let's use this as a toolbox, and we'll finish. Then we'll go on to some of those other tools that are available.
Thanks. Go ahead, Colin.
Thanks, Sam. The only thing I'll add, Stuart, to that is really the answer to that question depends upon how the company writes those overarching policies on jurisdiction. I will say that API has done assessments where we go in and, we thought the scope was one thing, but they've limited the safety management system relevant to 1173 to their natural gas operations, for instance, and not the electrical side of their business. So I just want to encourage people to understand what the right fit is, but also give the guidance that there are some operators right now that are in the process of combining those. So I will say, from a best practices perspective, if you want to get the most bang for your buck from your 1173 program, it really should just be thought of as your internal management system that you can then map directly to the 1173 requirements. I would encourage you to not think about SMS as a separate thing, but how you do business every day already. And you can connect those directly to the SMS requirements. We don't require like a separate management system. That's not the point of this. You do not have to have sections of your management system even that align with the 10 categories. You just have to have programs that fulfill the shall and shoulds. And it really is meant to be the most flexible process possible to do that. But I wanted to throw out the most successful companies are applying this across all their operations so that they get the benefit of ensuring that the right connections are made and that those processes are efficient and are inclusive of everyone in the organization that needs that safety information.
Thanks, guys. This next question kind of, I think we teed it up well there. Just thinking about that mapping process, and you think about 1173 being an overarching framework. How does 1173 map? This questioner asked about ASME B318S, but thinking about that standard as well as other standards, how do you guys help operators see that connection?
I'm happy to start, Sam, if you want me to.
Yeah, go ahead, Colin.
Please do, Colin.
Absolutely. So from an implementation perspective, 1173 is the umbrella. So it's more about the processes and procedures and connectivities, but your standards, like you just mentioned, coupled with just some that come to mind, like 1175 leak detection, things like that, those are a part of your management system. So what I would encourage you to think about is that it's less about it goes right here, but think about these other standards as, oh, this standard, because they're talking to these three teams, those three teams are involved in these elements of pipeline SMS, and we need to make sure they're on the same page about that standard requirements. So for me, it's more about establishing that framework that's inclusive of the 1173 requirements, and then figuring out where those other standards fit within the programs that are identified as being part of the safety management system. Because, and I know Sam and I are actually going to be talking about this a lot coming up in the future, because API is also starting to think about how to do a better job of organizing all of the guidance, for instance, and being able to do so in a framework that makes sense. And the 1173 framework is one option on the table for trying to figure out where those other standards that materially impact safety can be nested for a more broad picture of what it takes to be a safe operator. But to specifically answer your question, 1173 is the framework, and you can build anything into it that you think is necessary. And that includes API standards, other standards, guidance documents that we publish for free, etc.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I would just say, similar to Colin's point, 1173, I think, is a strong complement to either ASME or CER, ISO standards. And really, they all drive towards a similar goal, which is better management and reduction of risk and improved safety performance.
Yep. No, I mean,
Stuart,
I think even
I would only
ahead,
add, though, that some of those other international standards were consulted kind of in the writing of the first edition. And so there shouldn't be anything in 1173 that's going to conflict with an ISO standard from a principal perspective. Really, 1173 was to try and take those documents that are applicable to every industry and translate it to how does this affect pipeline.
Nice. No, that's good. I mean, I was going to say, I think just the simple plan, do, check, adjust cycle is key. And so if you're thinking about your gas integrity management program, like ASME B31AS may have it in there, but just that, do your program, check it, adjust it, plan, do, check, act. I mean, I think that's a simple concept that can be applied in any aspect of pipeline operation. So we got about 5 minutes. I think this might be the last question, but I think it's a good one. So thanks to you all who have offered up questions. Going back to that relationship between the operator and the contractor, Colin, this one you might be able to answer, but Sam, if you have any anecdotes, please chime in. How can you share how operators have effectively increased understanding within the contractor community of PSMS and implementing PSMS? Are there any anecdotes, best practices that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely, Stuart. Thanks. So I would say there's kind of two camps in this answer. The first camp is more of the proactive operators, and some things that I would encourage you to do is whenever you have a contractor engagement day, as I know a lot of operators have some form of contractor engagement in that way, it would be a perfect time, at least for an awareness perspective, for them to understand that the guide exists and the tools exist for them as well, so that they can just start the process. We think that one of the biggest benefits of this, candidly, is just alignment on the language and the terminology. We've gotten a lot of feedback from operators that say, as we've aligned some of this terminology with SMS, all of a sudden the contractor performance reviews are becoming more fruitful because they're identifying kind of the right causes of incidents and learning how to talk about that from a management system perspective. I would also argue because there is a proactive camp, there's going to be a reactive camp. And, one way to do this is to have us come in if some of your contractors have issues and at least do some education. I would argue, or I would just say, not argue, but I and my team have been present at some of these contractor engagement days, and we'd be happy to at least give an overview presentation to any, stakeholder groups that you have in mind. But for me, something to really keep in mind, though, is that, and this gets into, how your business functions. But for the contractor program to really meet the road, I would encourage all of you on here to take a look at those procurement and legal exhibits that you require your contractors to sign, because there may be some efficiencies to be had by utilizing this pipeline SMS method to get that binder off the shelf. So that is kind of how we are thinking about it, in a way where this program won't become a stick for problem or contractors say that have incidents. We're not here to beat them over the head for having incidents. We're here to provide them that expertise and try and help them grow their own programs.
Yeah, I would just build off what Colin said. He mentioned, I think, two good leading practices. One are those contractor engagement days or forums, whether that's a quarterly or annual basis. I think those are great ways to promote SMS. The other being the procurement process and the review process. I think a great way to incentivize implementation of SMS. And I would just say overall, build them into your conversations, whether you're talking about stakeholder engagement initiatives, or you're including them and incorporating them into your corrective action program with the ability to submit kind of reports and follow up on them. The more the contractor feels like they are embedded in the actual system of a PSMS and in the implementation and in the kind of day-to-day, this is just how we do business, this is just what we do, I think the easier it is and the more seamless it will be for them to get involved in the process, help drive it, help improve it moving forward. This kind of contractor implementation of SMS is actually something we asked in the annual survey this year for the first time. And so we'll be sharing some of those leading practices in the annual report that comes out this spring or early summer. And so just a little bit of a preview for that as well. We'll be highlighting some of those practices moving forward.
Nice. Well, good. Well, I've got 1 o'clock here on the East Coast, so we're going to have to leave it there. But thanks, Sam. Thanks, Colin. Lots of good information. I guess we'll leave it there today, but by all means, you see our emails. Please do reach out if you have any questions or want to talk more. So thanks, everybody, for attending. We will adjourn and look forward to seeing everyone at some future occasion, event, whatever it might be. Take care, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Stuart.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.